finest mowers here in my junkyard, and today I'm going to show common lawn tractor engines and some of their basic problems. For instance, let's say what's under the hood of this Craftsman. A Briggs & Stratton Intech single cylinder. These right here, probably the most common problem I see with these is carburetor issues. And that's with, you could find these with two different carburetors. This one has the Walbro carburetor. This is the better of the two carburetors. There is another carburetor called the Nicky. And the Nicky, I mean, it's a decent carburetor, but there's a lot of plastic inside. And the trouble is there's like an O-ring, and that O-ring will go bad. See, the needle and seat, the fuel solenoid can all be good, but if that one O-ring is bad, this carburetor will fill up, run through the intake, and fill the crankcase and hydrolock these. I've also had trouble with leaky valve cover, valves coming out of adjustment, as well as camshaft problems that these engines are notorious for. Plus, this is just from my experience this year, and this one is one of them. The majority of these I've had have all been blown up that I've had to replace, which is this one. It turns so far and stops. This is going to be a next spring project where I pull the motor and repower it with something else. Now, how about this bigger black Craftsman DYT 4000? The Briggs V-Twin Intech. Now, my opinion, far as these newer motors go, if I were to buy new, I would either buy one of these right here, or a Kawasaki V-Twin. My opinion, at least. Common issues I've had with this motor. Not really a whole lot. From my experience at least, they've seemed to be a pretty decent engine. I have noticed leaky valve covers. Of course, they all seem to really have leaky valve covers. Leaky sump gasket. What else? You might occasionally have a fuel pump go out. But, and this is common problems that I've had with these engines. These seem to be an okay engine. Seem to be. But that's my opinion, at least. Now, how about the next one in line? This Craftsman LT1000. This is a Briggs IC overhead valve. I like these engines, these older Briggs engines. These are good engines. This is the newer model with the overhead valve design. They do make this same exact engine. That's a Flathead design, which I have one of them. Common issues I see with them. Of course, leaky valve cover, check the valves, the carburetor issues, and that's if, I believe this one, somebody threw a Nicky carburetor on, which somebody did indeed. Nicky. Not a huge fan of that carburetor, but if you know how to clean them and what to check for, that O-ring I mentioned before, they're not terrible carburetors. But if you compare it to the Walbro is a better carburetor. Of course, this is one with this easy drain. I don't like these. This is a common thing that leaks, which it looks like this one has. And it's not particularly these engines, it's if your engine is equipped with one of these. These tend to leak, they vibrate, they loosen, and they leak. I've also had starter bendixes go on these. These use the plastic gear. and I've had the plastic gear go out on me. So, really, not a whole lot of trouble with these. Oh, and the coils tend to go out. But, of course, you know, any engine with a lot of time on it, the coils are going to go out. But other than that, these right here are a good engine. I like these engines. If I was looking to repower a mower for myself to use, I would probably use one of these. Now, since I'm on a Briggs & Stratton spree, here's a Briggs & Stratton Vanguard engine. Now, they do put different covers on these to call them different things, but these pretty much have the same problems as the Briggs IC overhead valve. Now, what makes these so special is this is when Briggs started to put spin-on oil filters on their engines. And these were another engine that was pretty good. The only thing I don't really like about these is you pull this cover off and there's another cover underneath. There's two covers you got to remove. Same common problems, leaky valve cover like I see this one has. Set the valves, carburetor issues. I see this one's got the nicky carburetor as well. And now over here, this right here is basically the same engine. It's just they put a different cover on it. And it says white intact overhead valve. This isn't the same intact like that first one I showed you in that red Craftsman. This is a Vanguard. And if I pull this off, you'll see there is a additional cover underneath. That's the only thing I don't really like about these engines. But other than that, just like the Briggs IC, I really like this engine. Now, right across from where I am, there's this. This is the Flathead Briggs IC. This one says Diamond Plus on it. A couple more mowers over, this one actually says IC. Same issues as before, minus the set the valves and leaky valve cover, where this is a flathead. The valves are integrated in the head, instead of being on top of the head. Good motors. I like these. This right here is a Briggs & Stratton IC opposed twin. I've seen where, you know, carburetor issues with these, where if they sit for a while, they tend to gum up, and usually they seem to be an issue where you clean them and then they don't really work out, because on these, the fuel pump is right on top of the carburetor. The fuel pump tends to go out once the carburetor itself is plugged. My experience, at least. This back cover right here tends to leak. Sump tends to leak. These are another good engine. I like these engines. They're smooth. They sound good. The only negative I gotta say about these engines is they suck a lot of fuel. They're thirsty for fuel, but they're good engines. I like them. Now, how about this Husqvarna with a broken hood? This has a Kohler command. Kohler commands, I really like Kohler command engines. They gotta be some of my favorite small engines besides the Briggs overhead valve, the single cylinder. These are a pretty good engine. Leaky valve cover like they always have. Carburetor issues. Kohlers seem to have quite a few carburetor issues where if that fuel solenoid right there goes out, if it's, you know, quits working, you cut the tip off and you screw it back in, they tend to even though the needle and seat is good. And that's another issue that these have, is needle and seat issues. But I've had before where that fuel solenoid quit working, so I just cut the tip off and screwed it back in. Fills the crankcase every time. My experience with these things, at least. Coils have gone out like this one has. This is the second one this summer. I haven't really had a whole lot of these this summer, but this is the second one in a row where bad coil. As well as fuel pump issues. This is kind of an interesting design where they put the fuel pump on. If you're if you're standing in front of the machine, it's on the left side. Normally, I mean, it depends usually. But normally you would put the fuel pump in line with the carburetor. But this design, it pumps from the left side, goes up, goes across, and then down to the carburetor, rather than be in line. Kind of a different design. I'm not a huge fan of that, but it does seem to work well. Really, that's about it. Another good engine I really like. These things, they run smooth. They're pretty reliable. I like them. Now, how about this Cub Cadet here? What's this one have? Ah, the Kohler Courage V-Twin. These leaky valve covers, like they always tend to have, starters tend to go out on these things. They got valve issues where you got to adjust the valves. I've had, fuel solenoid stick on these. But these seem to be a halfway decent engine. I don't really have a whole lot of experience with these things, but they seem to be at least a halfway decent engine. Ooh, I got second thoughts about that. I don't want to show you that one. No, I will. This is a Kohler Courage single cylinder. I don't really like these engines. I just don't. These have the infamous Kohler valve cover gasket leaking. These things are known for that. You'll see these things pop up on Marketplace. Runs good, smokes when you start it up, clears after it's run. It's from that valve cover leaking, which it looks like this one could be doing. Other issues I've had with this. Carburetor issues. Same deal with that command. If this fuel solenoid goes bad, replace the whole carb or replace the fuel solenoid itself. But yet you'll find that if you just buy the solenoid, you're almost better off to spend a little bit more and get a whole carburetor. And put one with one of these fuel solenoids that's cut off on a fuel pump operated Kohler Courage. This isn't really a problem. This is more of a pet peeve. And I made a little short about this before. And that's this screw. It's a carriage bolt behind the cover. And this will slide out. And it makes it hard to get this nut started. I hate that about these things. It usually takes me a few attempts to get them. Actually, no, it wasn't that pet peeve. That's another one I had. It was on that Troy belt. You'd pull this carburetor off and it would hit the frame. You had to unscrew the solenoid since you can't remove the studs on this. Or maybe you can remove this one, but this one not so much, where it's a carriage bolt behind. Another issues I've had, these engines, I find they do stupid things for whatever reason. I had one before, kept blowing dipsticks. For some reason, it was having too much crankcase pressure, blowing the dipstick up. That's an example of one of these stupid things that these little engines tend to do. That same one that did that, it had a problem where you'd hit the key and you'd crank and crank and crank and crank and crank, and eventually it would start. But once it started and it ran great. I cleaned the carb, new spark plug. It helped a little tiny bit, but not really. This engine is commonly called the bucket engine. how this engine has its oil pan is it's kind of coming like this, goes over and up. So it's kind of shaped like a bucket. Rather than a traditional where it's just level across. And plus, since it's got that bucket design, the oil filter's moved up here on one of these engines. I don't like these things. I don't have, you know, high hopes of one of these of lasting. Then where you see where it says twin cam. That twin cam they're talking about is plastic. Plastic cam gears on these. I don't it's just something that I don't see any hope in. I can't see one of these things lasting. And one more thing. They put the sump cover on top. And those bolts tend to loose up. And that cover can shift. I had one do that on me once. And then if you ever want to pull the sump, you got to take this cover off. You got to pull the flywheel. It's nice that you don't have to pull the engine. But still, I mean, you got to pull the flywheel. You got to pull the coil, the alternator. Just to pull that sump off. I don't like that design. Don't care for these engines. I try to avoid them when I can. But in this case, this was a free tractor, so I'm not going to turn down free. Now, there you have it. That's the most common lawn tractor engines that I've messed with, that I have messed with. I know I didn't mention every single small engine, like I didn't mention a Kohler Command V-twin or any Tecumseh engines, but I'm just going by what I commonly work on. And I know I didn't touch on push mowers either. That's a topic for another video. But as far as engines I like the single-cylinder Command. I like all the Briggs IC engines, such as the Flathead, the overhead valve, the Vanguard. Those are all good engines. Even the opposed twin. Sucks a lot of gas, but it is a good engine. Far as newer stuff goes, the only one I would really consider buying brand new would be the Briggs V-twin. I don't really care for the Kohler Courage single-cylinder. The V-twin, it's had its ups and downs. I had one blow up on me, started spitting oil, but of course, too, I could have had something that was abused, run low on oil. So, I'm not going to blame the motor. I'm just going to blame that somebody abused it. But time will tell if the Courage is a decent engine. Now, there is one more engine that I didn't mention that I would consider buying brand new. And it's not really a common engine I've messed with. I've only had two this summer. And that's this. This is the Kawasaki V-twin on these actual John Deeres from the dealer. I haven't really messed with these too much, but from what I've heard and from what I've seen, these seem to be a pretty good engine. And with that, I would say that's a wrap for this video, so stay tuned to see more videos soon.